All right, first up, we have Karsten Silz. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yep.
Great. All right. So Karsten, you've worked as a full stack Java developer for a long time, 23 years in the Europe and in the US. Started or co-founded a software product in the US and led the product development there for 13 years. After the company was sold, 2017, you became a contractor in Germany and the UK, doing Spring Boot, Angular, and Flutter, and co-founded the SaaS startup Your Home in Good Hands as CTO in 2020. So you've been pretty busy building companies, huh?
Yeah, it's the second startup here for me, so I'll see how that goes. The first one was very, very different, so this one is, yeah. Okay.
Sure. And a little less technical, you grew up in Germany, but you've worked in multiple countries, lived in multiple countries. Do you have a favorite country to visit?
Well, I would say that I spent about 5 years working in the United States, and I think Germany and the United States, they're pretty far apart. You know, Germany is very security oriented, you know, people looking for government help. United States opposite, right? You know, risk reward, fast lifestyle. And so I think I like the UK because it's somewhere in the middle, right? It's got, you know, some of the US chains. So you get like a Taco Bell over here. And it's a bit of the, you know, liberal kind of mindset, but it's also a bit European. So I like it here. I've been here for nearly 3 years now. I'm enjoying my time in Milton Keynes, north of London.
Awesome. Yeah, I've only lived in the US. I've visited a few countries. I really like Australia. That's probably my favorite place that if I could go back to, I would. What's your favorite tech gadget or office tool that you have?
I'm going to go off a little bit here and I say I think my favorite tech gadget is the original iPhone. I didn't actually have that original iPhone, but I think it was very significant because, you know, for the last couple of 100 years, all the advances in science or tech and culture came from, you know, Western world, which is, you know, Europe and America, you know, 1 billion people today, give or take. And with the iPhone, you know, that put a computer into the pocket of pretty much every adult. And so I think over the next, you know, decades or hundreds of years, you know, we'll see the entire world participating in a moving society and technology, you know, forward. So, you know, the internet made knowledge available, and the iPhone and then the Android, you know, which made it popular or brought it to the masses, you know, made it accessible. So that's why I think this is a, you know, a watershed moment in human history to me.
Awesome.
And that's, you know, if that sounds like a deep thought, it is. And that's why it's not from me, it's from Mark Andres and the Netscape co-founder. I heard it on a podcast and I said, yep, that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, that was definitely a huge invention coming out with the iPhone. I mean, it definitely changed our world, added a lot of connectivity. And it's, you know, it's kind of weird to think back at the time of just using a payphone. If you're out and about and you needed to call somebody, it's like, well, I got to find a payphone. And
yeah. And I mean, there's all the apps and stuff, but I think for me, the most important stuff is that people can now learn and get knowledge from, you know, pretty much everywhere, right? You know, between YouTube and all the, you know, online training stuff, you know, the phone is the device that lets you learn from everywhere, right? And that's why, you know, I'm optimistic for humankind's future, you know, maybe a bit of a minority here, but yeah.
And are you a concert goer?
Yes, I am. I actually was at the Kings of Leon concert yesterday in Birmingham. I must say that was a pretty lame show. So, you know, they're not really a good show band. We watched The Script, which is an Irish band before, and those guys really rocked. But Kings of Leon, there was, yeah, nothing special.
Disappointing. What was your first concert?
My first concert was actually Bruce Springsteen. I grew up in East Germany behind the Iron Curtain for you guys. You know, yeah, I'm pushing 52 in exactly 2 weeks. So in 1988, he played one gig in East Berlin, and they sold 100,000 tickets, but they let 300,000 people onto the ground. So I was one of these 300,000 people. I don't think I heard or saw a lot, but, you know, hey, I was at a Bruce Springsteen concert behind the Iron Curtain in 1988 in East Berlin.
Wow, that is a pretty interesting story. I can't imagine being packed in with that many people.
Yeah.
Especially these days with COVID.
Yep.
And what would be the best advice that you ever received as a software engineer?
I think that it's always about communication. When stuff goes wrong, it's always because, person A didn't talk to person B, people C was expecting something from person D, person E doesn't like person F. So, the older I get, the more I'm amazed how people get anything done, with all these communication lines, because the more stuff, the bigger your project, the more communication goes on. So, how does Samsung ship, hundreds of millions of phones? How did they put the man on the moon with this laughable, compute power? How did they build the, Notre Dame in Paris? How did they build the pyramids in Egypt for that matter? So, never ceases to amaze me how people get stuff done.
All right. Well, I believe that's all the fireside questions I have for you. So
okay,
I'll go ahead and hand this over to you, and I'm looking forward to your talk.
Wonderful. So I'm going to share my screen. So if it all works out, then you should see a text edit document which says bpf.li/ang, which is actually also the talk page for my talk. I'm going to paste it into the chat page. So do you see that? Please give me a... Oh, wonderful. Okay. So I'm going to switch over. Now I'm going to play my keynote. I'm not going to see anything except for because keynote takes over. So you got to tell me if something is wrong, or I think I can probably see the chat. Anyway, so here we go. Wonderful. So can you see my slide, my title slide?
Yes, I can.
Okay, wonderful. So I'm going to get started. So thank you for the introduction. I'm here today to answer one question for you. Can we actually build mobile web and desktop frontends with Flutter and one Codebase? And the answer is yes, we can, but we shouldn't, because I can really only recommend Flutter on mobile, not on web and desktop. And when it comes to mobile, I'm sorry to say that I think for Angular developer, React Native is a better fit than Flutter. So here's the agenda. First, I'm going to tell you what Flutter. Then the main part of the talk is how does Flutter actually work. And I'm going to tell you about my Flutter experiences in my project briefly, and then finally the showdown, Flutter versus React Native. So who made me the expert here, right? Well, in a sense, I did myself, because I put a Flutter app into the app stores. Many people do that. But I'm also a Java news editor for InfoQ, and I helped organize the QCon London conference, and I helped organize the Java and front-end track. So I think I've got an idea of what's going on in the industry. I've been a Java developer for 23 years, Angular 4 years, and Flutter for 2 years. But despite that, I'm not associated with these projects. I'm not a developer advocate. I'm not trying to sell you a book or training course or anything here. I really just want you to better projects faster, which is actually also the name of my website, bpf.li, which is where you'll find the slides and much more. So you either type in that link now, bpf.li/ang, the slides are already up there, or you scan the QR code. I'm going to show this again at the very end of my talk. So I'm going to move on in 3, 2, 1, 0 seconds. Okay, so let's get started. Why do we need Flutter as Angular developers, right? I mean, we've got an Angular web app that covers PC and mobile, works fine. And, the apps that I'm talking about here are enterprise and consumer apps. So not games, not media player, just run-of-the-mill app stuff. Now, unfortunately, there are some issues on mobile. Right? The first thing is you sometimes run into hard restrictions. For instance, there are no push notifications on iOS, at least currently. I think Apple just announced that they're going to come in 2023. But if you want to have push notifications on iOS right now, can't do that with a web app. Also, across all platforms, you probably have about 50 megabyte of local storage. In my app, I want to store much more data. So, I'm out of luck there. And you probably don't have access to all the native features. And I think that it's also easier to tap into the mobile power of our phones with native applications, because, I mean, with apps like TikTok, we can edit videos on these phones. With a Fortnite, games like Fortnite, we play online multiplayer games on these phones, right? So the native app power that I'm talking about is that you've got local storage, gigabyte of local storage, typically. You can install with a native app a database. You've got a local SQL database, NoSQL database, whatever tickles your fancy. You've got CPU power that's, good enough, comparable to, like a 5-year-old PC, maybe, and you can call backends, right? You can call them with REST or whatever protocol you want. So I think the way that I think about native app is that it's more desktop application and less web application, right? So that's the mobile power that I'm talking about. And then finally, the last point is it's hard to get a native look and feel on mobile. So why is that important, right? Why do we care about native look and feel? Well, let me give you an example of a German online banking app I have to use. Everybody probably hates their banking app and their mobile phone provider and their cable company. But anyway, so here's the mobile app on the left. The text doesn't really matter. Currently, they're wrapping a web application as a mobile app. You see that on the left, and the process of transferring that to a fully native application. So, what's the difference, right? Well, first of all, the web app has that hamburger menu. That's hard to reach and not really obvious. And it's always, 2 tabs. 1 tab for the hamburger menu, 1 tab for the functionality. On the native UI, you've got a tab bar, a nav bar. That's easy to reach. It's obvious because most apps use it, and it's 1 tab for most used features. So score 1 for native UI here. And then if you look closely, you see these little twisties here. So you can actually tap on those, but again, they're not obvious, right? Whereas that you can tap on these cards on the right-hand side, that's pretty obvious. They've got a different color, and, they really stick out. And, subjectively, I think that really looks nicer. So to sum up, native look and feel, it's easier to use because it looks and works like all the other apps, and it looks nicer, at least to me. And Google agrees with me because for all the Google apps on iOS, Google Mail, Google Maps, YouTube, all of those, they just announced a couple of months ago that they're going to switch from Material UI to native iOS UI. And here's why. Okay, so the responsible Google manager says that only with a native iOS UI, their products really feel great on Apple platforms. Okay, so if we do that, then now we have an Angular web app. We keep it for the PC, but then we put a native cross-platform application right next to it because we don't want to build 2 separate iOS and Android applications. That's too expensive. So when I talk about native, I really mean 3 different things. Number 1 is it's a native app. It runs natively. You can install it through the App Store, not a bookmarklet. It's really in the App Store because that's important for discoverability. It's got a native look and feel. We just talked about that. And it has access to native features. Now, given those criteria, what kind of frameworks are actually out there? And, there's a whole bunch of them. I'm talking about 3 here in this talk. You find some more on the webpage, and it's going to be easy to, probably find a dime a dozen frameworks out there because the pain of not having to write 2 separate mobile apps is just so big that there's lots of solutions out there. So my filter here is it's open source and it's popular. And that filter let 3 frameworks through. First one is Flutter from Google, started 2017. Then we've got React Native from Meta/Facebook, started 2015. And then we've got an odd one here, Xamarin/.NET MAUI. So Xamarin is the old name. It's from Microsoft, started in 2011 before Microsoft bought it, and they're currently rewriting it as .NET MAUI. MAUI is not only an island in Hawaii, it's also the name of multi-application user interface. Now, the .NET MAUI part isn't really finished yet. I think they're still working on it. They just kind of converted the old Xamarin part to work in .NET MAUI, but the new stuff that works more like Flutter ain't ready yet. Okay, so let's just sum up. In mobile web, we run into some hard restrictions like storage or no push notifications. We can't fully use mobile power, and we don't have an easy way to get native look and feel. And for native on mobile, we want to run natively, have a native look and feel, and access native functionality. So that concludes the first part. Why Flutter? So now, how does Flutter actually work? Well, the first thing I want to show you is the mascot here, Dash. Dash, did you get it? Kind of dashing in from the left. Okay, well, German humor, what can I say? So anyway, so that's Dash, the mascot for both Flutter and Dart, the programming language. And because Flutter is a Google project, the first question that everybody asks you when you give a talk about Flutter is, will Google kill Flutter? And, to be honest, that's a hard-earned reputation. The entire website's dedicated to projects killed by Google. Our current count is 267. So of course, when we have the question, will Google kill Flutter? The answer is, we don't know. Now let me just give you some pointers here from me, and obviously that's very subjective. So number one, what's bad about Flutter is that it's got competition. I mean, if you look at the Angular webpage, and you can, capture that on my talk page, it says for web, mobile web, native mobile, and native desktop. So, I was a bit surprised that with Angular, you can build native mobile and native desktop application, but that really means, it's pretty much the same as Flutter, at first glance, right? And then, of course, we've got Jetpack Compose, which you could argue is Flutter just for Android. Now, on the plus side, there's some external commitment here, which always makes it harder to kill projects, not impossible, but harder. For instance, Toyota will use Flutter for car infotainment systems, and Canonical rebuilds Ubuntu apps with Flutter. And it's also popular, at least partially. You see that in the last section. So Flutter runs or creates applications that run on mobile, desktop, and web. So how long have these different platforms been stable? Well, mobile went first, iOS and Android went stable 3.5 years ago, web a bit more than a year ago, Windows a couple of months ago, February this year, and macOS and Linux just last month. So now all of these platforms are officially stable. The programming language that Flutter uses is called Dart. So what's Dart, and why do we need to learn another language? Yeah, I know. So Dart, oops, sorry. I think I pressed the wrong button here. And technical difficulties. So here we go. I think that would be the time where I hum some elevator music. You're glad that I can't. I didn't. Okay, so Dart was originally developed for the browser. And you can say it's a simplified version of Java tuned for UI development. But it's got a couple of features that Java doesn't have, like null safety. So it's you can't get the dreaded null pointer exceptions that people know from Java. And it has, for instance, async await for concurrency, which it borrowed from TypeScript. Like many UI frameworks, pretty much everything happens on the one main thread by default, but you can create your own threads. They're called isolates. So here's a class in Dart. So we've got one class, my class, that extends another class. We've got 3 fields defined here, and then we have a method. Okay. And as I said, it looks more like Java than TypeScript. So if we kind of look at how would that look like in TypeScript, then we see it here, right? And so this is the TypeScript version of that same class. And now if we switch back, we can pick out and say, okay, variable declaration, a bit more verbose because we have to put a var in front of it. But simple methods are a bit easier because we just have the closure here to return the string. Don't have to do the whole, angle bracket, the bracket and return statement business. So Flutter is pretty quick with releases, one about every 3 months, and maybe three to 5 minor releases in between them. And what's important, because Google both controls Flutter and Angular, there's typically a new version of Dart with each Flutter release. So that's why Google continuously tunes Dart just really for Flutter. I mean, there are some usages of Dart outside, but the main purpose of Dart is to power Flutter, and Google takes full advantage of that. Libraries are called plugins in Flutter. There's about 26,000 out there. Not all of them are for web desktop. Most of them run on mobile, but not all on web and desktop. Most of them are open source, and in the 2 years that I worked with them, they've got a pretty good survival ratio. I know some other ecosystems like the Grails ecosystem in the Java world where plugins died left and right. Here, over the 2 years, I didn't have a major plugin die on me, so I had to abandon it and replace it with something else. So, thumbs up. Also, forking plugins is really easy. If you ever find a bug in the plugin or you wish that they would do something different, just fork the GitHub repo of the plugin and put the fork URL directly into the build file. So no need to publish it to npm or some other repo. UI elements are called widgets, which is why I have that on my chest. Everything is a widget. So let's take a look at one of these widgets here. It's actually 4 widgets here. So that's Dart code, that's Flutter code. And so the first thing that we see, it's UI is code, right? So there's no style sheet, there's no UI builder. It's really just classes that we are looking at here. So for instance, here We've got a button with an event handler on pressed, which increases a counter, and the button has just one child object, which is the plus icon. And if you want to configure something, right, like for instance, saying the text and the button should be vertically, horizontally centered, then we set a property on the class, on the object. So no style sheets here. It's really, very similar to writing backend code because you're just dealing with classes. No style sheets, no templates. Everything is just in one file. Okay, so widget means UI is code. So you as a developer, you configure the existing widgets, or you create your own, for instance, to have a common style, use same fonts, use same colors, similar colors. Now the important thing here is that the widgets are emulated. So Flutter does not use native iOS or Android or web controls. Flutter emulates those, and that means that if iOS or Android introduce new widgets, Flutter then has to paint them, has to add them to their set. And unless they do, you can't use them, right? And so the saying is Flutter paints pixels. It uses a 2D graphic engine for that called Skier. Now, widgets alone don't really make our day. We need widget sets, which give us the look and feel. And there's 3 classes of widget sets in Flutter. The first one, the base one, is stuff like container, row, text, image, stuff that's the same everywhere. So no matter which platform you're on, you're always using the same text and image class. Then we've got 2 built-in widget sets, the material design, which works everywhere, the Android design language or Google design language, sorry. And then we've got the iOS widget set, which works on iPhone and iPad. Now, in order to get a desktop look and feel, that you have to rely on third-party widget set, which you'll see in a second. Talking about seeing in a second, for this talk, well, for similar talks, I created a sample Flutter app, and I'm going to show you 5 native look and feels with 1 code base. And if the demo gods smile at me, then you'll see that now. So here we go. Let me switch. And the first thing I want to show you is the iOS simulator. So that sample app that I'm talking about is running here. It's got 3 tabs, and you see it's iOS, right? So the name disappears, the label disappears. If I type in there, here's the button, and if I click save, then I get an iOS dialog. Now, because everything is emulated, I can actually switch and say, hey, make this thing look like Android. And so now I switch the app over to look like Android. So here, I need to look up because that's where the screen is in my setup. So here now we see it looks like Android, right? The field label is there. The radio button looks different and the dialog is different, right? So here we're seeing, being able to switch because Flutter just paints pixels. It emulates stuff. Now, that's not the only thing we can do. We can also run a native Mac application. So that uses a third-party widget set called macOS UI. And so you see, this is what Flutter thinks a macOS application looks like. We've got a save dialog here. And, just as you can imagine, we can make that look. Oh, sorry, that was actually Windows. Oh man, somewhere in Cupertino, somebody sighs now. So back to the beginning. So here, this is the macOS UI. We are having, macOS checkbox, and we've got the save dialog. Of course, the save button is on the right where it belongs. But as you could see, we could actually switch over and say, hey, I want this to look like Windows, where the save box is on the right. And then the final thing is the web application with the hamburger menu on the left. And here we have an Android UI. And again, looks like Android, like material design. And here we can also make that look like Windows, and boom. So now we have our web browser running something that looks like a Windows application, including the save button on the wrong side of the dialog. Okay, so back to my slides. So what did we just see? We saw that we had 5 different native look and feel: iOS, Android, macOS, Windows, and material design, kind of cheating, counted as 2 different look and feels. And we saw that we can switch look and feel. If you're interested in how I did that, the sample app is on GitHub, and you can find the link on my talk page. Now, when you build a Flutter application, you have to make 3 architectural choices. The first one is, same as an Angular, state management. Where do you put global state? Flutter ships with something that's Flutter specific called provider. I use Redux in my application. Then you got to pick your widget set. Do you use Material UI everywhere? Do you go native? Do you build custom stuff? I use native in my app. And then finally, for layout, how do you actually do responsive layout? There's nothing built into Flutter. So even on mobile phone, you've got different screen sizes or different orientation, right? And so I used a third-party plugin there that takes the Bootstrap grid and applies it to Flutter. Native integration. There's really 2 different ways to integrate Flutter. So the first one is you want to put Flutter Screens into native app. And that actually works on mobile. So in an existing native iOS or Android app, you can put Flutter Screens, so the WeChat app from China, does that. Unfortunately, it doesn't work with the web, so you cannot take Flutter Screens and put them into Angular apps. But I think at least for the web side, they're actually working on it, and desktop probably a bit later. What's more common is you want to run native code in Flutter itself. And here I'm talking about mobile because that's where my experience comes from. And by far the most common way to access native functionality is through plugins. So camera, pictures, location, network, this kind of stuff. You don't have to write native code. You use a Flutter plugin. You can also show native screens or web views. For instance, Google Maps plugin uses that to show you a native iOS or Android screen in Flutter. And sometimes you need to talk to native code, for instance, to receive push notifications. There you've got channels, which is publish and subscribe asynchronously between Flutter and native code. So you can, in both directions, send and receive messages. There's even a C API for more advanced usages. Now, how does Flutter actually, I talked about at the beginning that Flutter runs natively. So how does it do it? How does it get into the App Store? Well, it relies on platform toolchains. So for Android, you need Android Studio. For iOS or macOS, you need macOS and Xcode. And for Windows, you need Visual Studio, not Visual Studio Code, the real one, but the Community Edition suffices. The Flutter engine gets deployed as C++, except for the web, where it's a mixture of JavaScript and C++. And your app, your Flutter app, gets compiled into a native ARM library on mobile, into JavaScript for the web, and C++, Windows and Linux, and on macOS, I think it's Objective-C, the special C version that Apple uses. Now, code build and deploy is something that Flutter pays a lot of attention to because they want to create an SDK that developers love, which is smart because you don't have to use Flutter, right? There's all these other tools out there. There's native tools, there's React Native. So one way of setting yourself apart is having something that developers really like. I wouldn't say love, but really like. And that's a quote from the Flutter roadmap. And I think they've been successful there. So when it comes to code, what IDE can you use? You can use IntelliJ or Android Studio. And if you need something more lightweight, Visual Studio Code. So those are the 2 officially supported IDEs. Then Flutter's got DevTools, got the inspector similar to Web Inspector. It's got a profiler for memory, CPU, and network, and even got tool for jank diagnosis. So if your app doesn't run as fluent as it should, then it helps you out. And the important stuff is all of that, runs even if you launch your app just from a terminal, because these tools are built as an Angular web application. You don't need an IDE to use these tools. You can use them all the time. Now, project structure, I would say it's a mono repo. So all the code for all the different platforms in one Git project. So if you check out my sample projects, all the platform, just one Git project. So you get one folder for Dart and one folder per platform. And inside these platform folders, you see the typical shells you would expect, like app delegate Swift for iOS or main activity.kt for Android. So you can put your usual initialization code right in there. The build and deploy experience is fast on mobile, which is important because mobile is dog slow. It can easily take a minute or so until your iOS or Android application gets recompiled and deployed to mobile. Now, Flutter gives you 2 things that stand out there. Number 1, something called hot restart. So within about 3 seconds, I want to say the entire application is reset. Everything is reloaded back to the beginning. But what's more important is hot reload. So within about a second from you pushing save, the code is compiled and deployed and running live in your phone or in your emulator. On my talk page, you can find a video of that. So that's really awesome because it keeps you in the flow. Remember, 1 second from pressing save to the code being live. So with all that knowledge, I said in the beginning, Flutter on mobile gets thumbs up. Why? Because effectively you get 2 apps for the price of 1. You've got native look and feel. You've got access to native libraries, pretty much everything that you need. And the build and deploy is even faster than what you get with regular iOS or Android development. Now on the web, thumbs down. Why? Well, for widget sets, the only thing you have is material. In Angular or regular web development, you've got hundreds, thousands of design systems, component library, UI skins. Can't use any of them in Flutter, and the Flutter team always tells you you should customize material. So that's 2 thumbs down if I could give that. You also don't have access to platform libraries, so no access to NPMs. You just have to do with the Flutter libraries. And that means the libraries that you've got available is just tiny versus the hundreds of thousands or millions that you have on the web. On the desktop, it's similar. I mean, why do you even want to build a desktop application? For most people, web application is just fine. And Windows, Mac, and Linux, they just got stable, so there'll probably be dragons there, right? On the plus side, you can call C++ code, so you can probably access everything native there, native capabilities on the desktop. The widget set that I showed you for iOS, for macOS and Windows, they're open source, they're currently incomplete. And so, will they be complete, always maintained? Who knows? So that's why, the empty circle there. So let's sum up about Flutter. Dart is a simpler Java tuned for UI building. Plugins are the libraries. Widgets are the UI elements. They're emulated, not native widgets. The widget set give us the look and feel, and we get material UI and iOS baked in. We've got access to all native functionality, at least on mobile. It runs natively because it compiles to native code with platform toolchain. Code, build and deploy experience is great. And platform check says, Flutter really only shines on mobile. So that concludes that second chapter. And we're nearly there. Just briefly about my Flutter experiences. And a couple of slides. In my startup, I've got a traditional Java backend with a relational database. I use Firebase, Google's platform as a service for storing files and authentication. And I've got built two apps, an Angular app for managers and a Flutter mobile app for team members. So, and they both use the same JSON REST API into my Java application. So pretty straightforward. Why did I use Flutter? I didn't want to have these restrictions. I wanted to have unlimited local storage and push notifications. I also wanted to have native UI because I want the app to be as fast, as easy to use as possible. And I felt as a Java developer with Dart, which is very similar to Java and the productivity of hot restart and hot reload, I was off to the races here. Okay, you can find more on my talk page why I think that Flutter works and native UI works on Flutter, Firebase works, and some other things about my app. Some pearls of wisdom here from me. Okay, so those are my Flutter experiences. And now down to the showdown. Should you use Flutter or should you use React Native? Let's look at popularity first. Why? A popular framework, it's easier to learn and use, more tools, more training, more videos, more books, more questions. It's easier to convince your teammates and bosses. And if all else is equal, you can use the most popular one or try not to use a very unpopular framework. I measure popularity here with 6 data points. I look at what's installed in the app stores. I look at how often a technology is mentioned in job ads at Indeed.com in 62 countries. And I look at developer popularity, how many courses were bought at Udemy, how often do people search on Google, how often do they ask questions on Stack Overflow, and then a survey from Statista among developers. And here, these are the 6 categories, and Flutter is 100%. So React Native, when we look at installed apps, a bit more than Flutter, and Xamarin less than half of the installed base of Flutter. When it comes to job, that's the biggest advantage. React Native about twice as many jobs as Flutter and staying steady. Xamarin about half of Flutter job ad mentions. Courses being bought at Udemy, React Native half of what Flutter has, trending down, Xamarin 10%. Google searches, the same picture here. React Native half of what Flutter has, trending down, Xamarin 10%, trending down heavily. Questions at Stack Overflow, surprise, half of what Flutter has, trending down, and Xamarin even worse. And with developer popularity, React Native a bit below Flutter, trending down, and Xamarin dropping like a stone. So we saw that with app stores. React Native is slightly ahead of Flutter. Employers love React Native, but developers love Flutter. So if you subscribe to my newsletter, you find that kind of analysis for other areas as well. Okay, so let's look at some Flutter code here. So this is what the code looks like in Flutter, a column for vertical alignment, and then two elements, a text and a button. Now, if we look at that in React Native, we see it looks different, right? It looks more HTML-like. We've got a view here, but it uses HTML syntax, and it's talking about styles here. And then we've got a text and a button, and that looks more HTML-like as well. And that's really the main difference, that React Native is a lot more HTML-like. You use JavaScript or TypeScript as the language. You use an HTML syntax for the UI elements. You use CSS-like styling. You use Flexbox, CSS Flexbox for layout. You use NPM libraries. And you've got two different CLIs, one from a company, from an organization called Expo, and the other one, if you want to use simulators, you have to use the React Native CLI. Oh, okay. So now if you compare React Native versus Flutter, I would say, React Native a lot more HTML-like. Flutter looks more like Java code. React Native is a bit slower because your app is interpreted JavaScript code at runtime, whereas Flutter gets compiled to native. So it's a faster app, gives you a more fluid experience. React Native uses native UI elements. Flutter emulates them. If you were to build a web project and a mobile project, it's two, one React Native. In Flutter, you get a mono repo, no matter the platform, or just one Git repo. And desktop support in React Native is unofficial and official in Flutter. So which framework should you use? And I do this by the developer background. If you're a web developer, I recommend, and that includes, of course, Angular, use React Native first, then try Flutter. If you're a .NET developer, use .NET MAUI first, then Flutter. Everybody else, use Flutter first, and then React Native. So, which brings me back to the big question from the beginning. Can we build mobile web and desktop frontends with Flutter and one Codebase? Yes, we can. And I showed this to you. But we shouldn't, because Flutter really only shines on mobile. There's too many restrictions on web and desktop. And as I just said, because React Native is a lot closer to Angular development, that's why I recommend it if you need to do something on mobile. So that finishes the last section of my talk, which means it's the end, or is it? Because my talk doesn't stop when I stop talking. Hey, that's my trademark. Well, it should be, because I invented it. So on the talk page, here's that QR code again. You find slides and videos, additional information. You find the link to my native sample app, links to get started with Flutter and React Native, and you can subscribe to my newsletter or tell me what I should do better next time. And that's that. So do you guys have any questions?
Awesome. Thank you so much for that talk. Yeah, I think we do have some questions. I'm going to hand this over to Alex to check the Q&A. If anybody else has any other questions, make sure you put it in the Q&A section on Zoom. It's a lot easier for us to find it there versus in the chat.
So should I stop screen sharing? That's stopped, right? Isn't it? I think so.
Yeah, you can stop sharing if you'd like.
Yeah. Now I need to find the window. Sorry, my clumsiness. Here we go. I think. Where's the window? Sorry, can you stop screen sharing? I currently don't see.
Let's see here.
Anyway, why don't you ask me the question while I'm fumbling around here like an idiot? Here we go. Stop sharing. There it is. So
there we go.
Wonderful.
Okay, so the first question that we have says, where is Flutter going next now that it's available on every platform?
They just hinted at it that probably TV and wearable is next, because that's both platforms where you have iOS and Android, and not this year. They explicitly said not this year, but my guess is it's next year. They've got a roadmap available. I linked to it on my talk page. So watch, and so wearable and TV is next, I think.
Thank you. So the next one says, is Flutter open source?
Yes. I'm sorry if that wasn't clear. All React Native, Xamarin, .NET MAUI, and Flutter are open source. There used to be a bit of a commercial component with Xamarin. I think you needed the full enterprise edition of Visual Studio to do some stuff, but I think with .NET MAUI now it's completely open source.
Okay, and the last one says, does Flutter require macOS to emulate iOS widget sets?
No, it does not. So you can emulate the iOS or macOS widget set on any platform. You can even run it in the browser if you wanted to. You know, that's the beauty of the Flutter Paints pixel approach. You can make everything look like any other thing. I wouldn't use it in production, but at least for testing, it could be quite handy if you're an iOS guy and you want to test Android, or you're an Android guy and want to test iOS. So it could be a quick way for you to check at least, does the UI look correctly. There are some nooks and corners where stuff doesn't really fully work, but you know, for having a first glance, you know, does that look good in general? That works well. Okay, and then it looks like we have one more. It says, React Native is better than Flutter, perhaps fill the following. And it says Ionic and then _Flutter. Oh. Yeah, as I said, there's a gazillion different platforms out there that say, hey, you know, let's build one mobile app for iOS and Android with one code base. You know, Ionic is one of them. And so I think the Ionic lets you build mobile application with even more of a web kind of stack. So I think that it's an option, but I think it's easier to get stuff. Sorry, one step back. I think what Ionic does is the same thing as Flutter. It emulates your iOS elements. I just have more trust in the Flutter guys to emulate all these widgets better than the Ionic guys, you know, which is something, you know, problem that React Native doesn't have. You know, it uses the native UI elements. Everything always looks correctly, but, you know, to get all this stuff correctly, you know, animations and stuff, you know, that's a lot of work. And so that's why I would say probably, you know, as much as it pains me to say, you know, probably React Native is a better option than Ionic. But I haven't looked into Ionic, so, you know, feel free to check it out and see how that stuff works. Thank you. And then another one just came in. It says, why start with React Native instead of Flutter for web devs? If you go to my webpage, then you see that really React Native is a lot more popular. All these dimensions, you know, job ad mentions, Google searches, Stack Overflow questions, you know, so a lot of people use React Native. I think the one thing, since I speak at conference, I talk to other people. They say the one thing that's against React Native is that React Native, you know, you say you have a React Native application, but in reality, this could mean you've got 5 different applications, because React Native is more like a library, and you've got lots of, you know, freedom to choose, you know, what router do you use, what state management. Angular is more of a battery included framework that, you know, it's opinionated, and so you've got less freedom to choose. So with React, you can screw things up, and even though you've got 5 different React apps, they'll don't look alike at all. Whereas with Angular, you know, I think it's more of a safer framework from that perspective. But if you just look at purely at a popularity, no contents, React Native wins. But for enterprise development, you know, there's a strong case to be made that, you know, with your entire team switching over, you know, every 2 years, you know, you want to have as many guardrails as possible in development, and there's less freedom to screw things up in Angular than there is in React Native.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again, Karsten. It was a great talk. I think we don't have any other questions, so we're going to go ahead and move on. Let me switch here. All right, next we have Felix, who's going to talk to us about Angular forms and the router.
Yeah, that's correct. Thanks.
Yeah, and forms are a very important part of pretty much any application, so I'm always interested to learn more about how to use it more effectively. So Felix, besides spending time with his family, he loves playing board games, road biking, sharing knowledge at Coding Coach and Angular Girls. He works as a remote senior engineer at Interfacewerk. He has a background in physics, but he turned his hobby of coding into a profession. He knew this was the direction he wanted to go in when Angular 2 was released back in 2016. So Felix, so you're a mentor at Coding Coach and NG Girls. What do you enjoy most about coaching?
Yeah, so I mentored, I think, 3 times at Angular Girls. 1 time at ng-conf the musical, and 1 time at ng-conf Rome, and 1 time independently, I think. And I have 2 active participants or mentees from Coding Coach, and we met weekly or bi-weekly for an hour for each participant. And what I really enjoy about mentoring is the people that you get in touch with, and everything that you give and explain, you will get back twice in response. So I have met many awesome people. Some are also here, like Alisa and Cassandra. Hi. And yeah, so yeah, it's you might can imagine there are situations in life where you are very happy when you receive some feedback, and where you can discuss topics that affect you. And yeah, I have been in such situations, and I was very happy about friends, about colleagues, about other developers who helped me out. And yeah, this is why I really like to participate in these kind of events.
Awesome. And what kind of advice would you give to others who are thinking about getting into coaching or mentorship?
You don't need to be afraid. This is yeah, when I started with mentoring or speaking at local meetups, I really was afraid that I do something wrong, or that people don't like me, or that I don't have enough knowledge. But I think everyone has the knowledge who can, everyone has the ability to help others. And therefore you can you can apply as a mentor. You can start applying for a talk at the meetup, for example. And yeah, this is the most important thing, to not be afraid. So yeah,
it's awesome. And so you said you're also a big fan of board game and tabletop games. What are your favorites?
My current favorite is Dune Imperium, but I would like to talk a little bit about games in general, because they are seen as nerdy, as boring, as some kind of bad activity, I would say, for many people. And I think that might relate to so I play the kind of heavier board games, I would say, which take I don't know, half an hour of rules explanation and something like that. But I really recommend to play games that you will enjoy in the end. And you won't enjoy, if you start with the board game hobby, you won't enjoy these kind of games. You will enjoy Ticket to Ride or Catan, or games like that. If you want to get more involved into this kind of hobby, I can really recommend Wingspan to you. This is a game in between, with a very friendly scenario and setting, and so
Awesome. Yeah, I jotted that down. I'm gonna take a look at it. That's cool. That's so cool. And you also have created a course recently on NX. What did you like most about using NX in your projects, and what have been some of the benefits of using it in professional development?
So I really like to use NX because there are many reasons. So one reason is that it sets up all the tooling that I like for me. I like to use Jest for unit testing. I like to use Cyprus for end-to-end testing. I like to use Prettier, ESLint, and everything comes out of the box with NX. And I don't have to care. I really use it for all my private projects, I would say. And the other reason is that especially on larger projects with a team, you can organize the code very well. There's a possibility to set up import restrictions. So when you set up a new library, you can say, okay, this library can import this other library, or this cannot import the other library. And in the end, you can end up with a monorepo that uses Angular, for example, for the front end, and Nest.js in the back end, which are both libraries based on TypeScript. And you can share code between those libraries, for example. And what I also like about NX, or the company of NX, there are many people who speak at conferences, and I am really thankful for their talk and their spreading of the knowledge they have.
Awesome. Yeah, I recently started messing around with NX, and I agree, like setting up a new project, like I wanted to try using Storybook, and it's like, oh, you just run one command and it just adds it for you.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I will let you take the floor and get to your talk. I'm looking forward to learning about forms with the router.
Okay, thank you. I will share my screen. Hope you can see it.
Yep, you got it.
Okay, so yeah, thanks for attending my talk about the Angular forms on a ride through the router. And as you can imagine, this talk will be about the Angular forms and the router, and maybe a little bit about bikes. But let's see, I have prepared an example app where we make some changes, and we use the Angular template-driven forms with the router. And most importantly, we understand the underlying mechanisms when we set up a form like this. Before we start, let me quickly introduce myself. We have already talked about a lot of stuff here. On the right, you can see one picture from the ng-girls, the musical, and you see here, for example, there's Brooke, one of the organizers of this meetup, and this is this is why I'm presenting right now. So because Brooke had me in mind and she asked me, and yeah, I'm really happy to be here. So I really like to use Angular. I like to use RxJS, and as you can imagine, this is the reactive thing, and this is also what happened to Angular forms and my my knowledge about Angular forms and my priorities. I really like the Angular reactive forms, and I was one of the people who said, okay, let's use template-driven forms for simple scenarios and reactive forms for complex scenarios. And yeah, but I attended ng-conf the musical, and there was this guy presenting this talk, Prefer Template-Driven Forms. I can highly recommend this talk. It's really brilliant. And I started to rethink my vision about the Angular forms, and now I use a lot more template-driven forms. And we also started at our company, or not started, but we went in a direction to use more ng forms instead of template-driven forms. So then we noticed that we have a problem when we want to divide the form based on the router. And therefore, I have prepared an example app. So here you can see a bike, and we have a button here, and you see a form on the left, and you see a bike on the right, which is an SVG file and some information about the file and some buy button. And yeah, as you can imagine, this form is huge just for this demo purpose, of course. But there are forms that are much larger in real world scenarios. And yeah, as you can see, you can edit it. It will apply the changes directly to the SVG file. And you can add or modify the bike in some very realistic ways, for example, like this one. You can change the name here, for example, and do all this kind of stuff. The rear color. Yeah. Okay, so, but this is really annoying. We have a lot of input fields here on the left, and it would be nice if we could have just a general section here on top and place the other sections here with some button group, tab navigation below in just one section, and use routing for this section here. Below here, I have some details about the app. It shows the validity, if it's touched or dirty. It shows the current value and the controls. So this is the app. And now we are going to refactor the app to use the router instead. But before we start with the refactoring, I will guide you quickly through the app. So we start with the main TS, which bootstraps our app module. And in the app module, we define routing. And we have just this basic home component here, which you have seen, which was the component that displays the picture of the bike. Then we have the pick a bike route with the picker component. We have a summary, and we redirect to the home component if we don't find any path here. So let's go to the interesting component, which is a picker component. And this picker component is injects a bike service. And this bike service holds the data that we need for our form. And I can show it to you. We have here the bike service. And in the bike service, we have the view model. And the view model is basically the object that is used by the form. And this also is mutatable. So this mutates when we make changes in the form. And when we click buy, we create a copy of this view model and store it in the bike here. So in the picker component, you see the template. We have the side-by-side layout. On the left, you see the form. And on the right, you see the preview. We have the bike component, which contains the SVG file. And you see the two action buttons. In the bike component, you see that we have an input, which is a bike. And you see that we just place the SVG here, and we can bind these styles here directly to the SVG tags. In the form component, we just have the input for the bike. And we have just a very common form here, a form tag. And we bind all of the bike properties with ng models. So, and okay. this is the bike. Okay. Here we see the app again, just to visualize it. And now we are going to refactor it to hold these separate sections. And therefore, we comment out all the stuff that we don't need here. And until here. And then we create some components. This might look a little bit repetitive, but it shouldn't take too long. Okay, we want to have a frame because we have the first section here is a frame and we want to create a frame component, can be on push. And we skip the tests for this talk purposes and run the command. And it should create a frame directory here with 3 files, the component, the template, and the CSS file. And we do that for all the others as well. Oh, sorry. Okay, we have the wheel, we have the engine, we have the brake, and we have the equipment. Okay, so now all the 5 components have been created. And now what we need in order to bind, sorry, let's close this. In order to bind the bike properties, we need the view model in the template, not in the template, but in the component class. And therefore, we can inject the service. So it's the bike service, and we have the bike, and the bike service equals the bike service, and this is the view model. So we need to remove the onInit, and then we can save it. And this is what we need to do for all of our components here. Shouldn't take too long. Okay. The frame component here and the wheel component. Okay, now we have access to our view model in each of these components. And what we can now do is, let's test if we can just copy this over here and put it to the frame component. Okay. Can format the document. And what we now can do is we need to create in here, instead of each of these sections, we just create a router outlet. And we define our routes here as children in the pick a bike component. I can do that a little bit faster. Okay, so here we have all of our components. And as you see, we just name it as they are named in the component here. We have a brake, engine, wheels, frame, equipment, and if nothing is found, we redirect to the frame. So let's have a look in the app. What's the current status? And we see that we display the frame section here. This is already the component that we have just created. So what we need to do in order to navigate is we need a tab component. So let's create another component. With tabs. And we skip the tests. Okay. And as you can see here, I'm using the NX console. I really like that. I cannot remember all of the parameters here when I use the terminal. So this is really a help for me. And okay, we have now the tabs, and in the tabs we use this navigation here, and we put some buttons in the navigation, and they have the router link to the frame, to the wheels, and so on. So of course we need to use this tabs component here. And now we can have a look. Oh, it looks a bit different because we don't have the correct styles yet. Sorry, just one moment. Okay, sorry. Let's put in some styles here. These styles are not part of this talk, so I won't go over them right now. But let's have a look now. Okay, this looks a bit different. We have our navigation here, and we have a problem for this tab, I think, but the other tabs work. Okay. So let's edit the HTML here for the other tabs. If we go to, let's make them side by side, and let's go to the wheels, and let's copy the wheels part and put it in the wheels HTML file. Then we go to the engine, and we copy the engine to the engine HTML file. Then we are going to the break, and we put in the break HTML content. And last but not least, we are going to copy the equipment in here. Okay. And hopefully this was the last repetitive part in this talk. So yeah, we can go on. Now we have here our tabs on top and below the router outlet. Okay, so let's have a look in the app module. I will close this side. Let's go to the app module here and the routing module, of course. And here for the wheels, we display the home component. Of course, we need to display the wheel component. Okay, so let's go to the app and let's check if it's working. Okay, we have all our form fields in place, and let's check if it works. Oh, this looks good. Amazing. So let's change some other entries here. Okay, Ultegra, oh, not Ultegra, but Angular Ace is the best engine. I can highly recommend that. And yeah, lights also nice. Okay, so this seems to work, but now let's have a look at the form details. There's something wrong here in this place, because what's happening is that the form only recognizes these three input fields. So we have the bike type attached to the form, the manufacturer, and the bike size. And this is also represented in the controls, of course. And the form only works if we touch, if we work with these form controls. So the status won't change if we adjust anything in here. Okay, so let's have a look why this happens. Please give me a second. Okay. let's go in here. And the first thing I would do if something works unexpectedly, I would go to the Angular docs and I would read the documentation. And it says, if used within a parent form, the directive also registers itself with the form as a child control. Well, I think we have a parent form and it does not register with the ng model does not register with its parent. So let's have a look. You can see it here. In the app root, we have the app picker, we have the form, we have a section. And we see we have a select here, and this select should find its parent form. Okay, but now, why does it not work? Maybe this is related. We see here some keywords that trigger something in my mind, which are parent, registering, directive, and I think this might be related to dependency injection. So let's recap that quickly. If you create a component or a directive, Angular will create an element injector for you. And this element injector holds the instances that you provide. So if you declare a component and in the component decorator, you say providers, for example, what you provide there will be part of the element injector. So if you put parameters in the constructor, Angular will try to resolve these dependencies for you, and it's happening via this element injector tree. So it goes up from this element to the parent element to the grandparent element and so on. And if it does not find anything, it goes here to the right, and we have another tree of module injectors, which are searched for that dependency. And if it cannot find the dependency, you see this error message. I think everyone has already seen it. No provider for the token found or the service or what you would like to inject. So the next. Then let's maybe go to the code, and I would like to explain a little bit. Here we have the pseudocode. It's a simplified version of what you have seen in the browser. And this is pseudocode. So you see here elements which are not really, which are not HTML elements, but these elements represent an instance of the component template. So this is called the logical view. And you see here that we have the app form, which is our component on the left here. And this component creates a logical view. And in this component, we use the form. We have an input field. We have another section. And in this section, we have defined the tabs and the router outlet. And what the router outlet does is it places the component below this tag. So, and since this is a component, this component creates its own logical view. And imagine that there's just an input field. So the inputs are really simplified. We have selects and so on in the app. But here for explanation purposes, I just picked one input with the ng model. And here you can see, let's maybe recap what's currently happening. So this ng model seems to work for us. We have the parts that are still part here of that component. So this select and this select can find its parent form. Okay. So, and the inputs that are in the routed components do not find its form. So what can we do now? Let's go back to our slides. And the first thing I would do is to have a look in the Angular source code. So here you can see the definition of the ng-form class. And you see that the ng-form class provides a form directive provider. And this form directive provider provides the control container, which is an alias for the ng-form. And this ng-form is exactly the ng-form instance that's created with the form tag. So as you see here in the selector, we select by the form tag. And when we see it, or when Angular sees it, it creates an ng-form instance. And this ng-form instance provides the control container for us. Okay, so let's have a look at the ng-model implementation in the Angular source code. So here we see that in the constructor, we have the optional and the host decorator before we inject the parent, and the parent is the control container. So, and this control container is exactly the control container that it finds when it resolves the dependency from the form. If it's, oh, sorry. If it's, yeah, it seems to be related. So maybe let's phrase it differently. If we use this ng-model here, we inject the control container, and it resolves the control container from here to here. And what we have seen is that this form creates an ng-form class. This is also not an HTML attribute. This is just for explanation purposes. So this, you should consider this as pseudocode. And this provides the control container. And now you see that this input can resolve this control container, but this input, this ng-model cannot. And maybe let's go back to the source code. And here you can see there are some slight modifications made to the dependency injection. So first of all, we have the optional decorator. And what this optional decorator does is that if this dependency cannot be resolved, it won't throw an error, but it will return null instead. Okay, this is, yeah, I think the simpler decorator. But now let's have a look at the host. So the host, let's go to the Angular docs, and we see parameter decorator on a view provider parameter of a class constructor that tells the DI framework to resolve the view by checking injectors of child elements and stop when reaching the host element of the current component. Okay, what does it mean? Let's phrase it in other words. The host causes the injector to look until it encounters the edge of the view. So let's go here. So until it reaches the edge of the view. So this one here would look for the ng-model here, and then it would stop. But fortunately, it finds the control container here. This ng-model is part of the app wheels logical view, and therefore it looks here and then it stops. And therefore it cannot find the control container here of that ng-form. Okay, what do we need to do? What do we need to do? If the ng-model just looks until here, we need to provide the control container or a control container here in this element. And what value can we use? here, there's this use existing. I will write it in the actual code after we clarified this here. So you can provide an alias and you can use an existing instance, and you can use the existing ng-form. So when we do something like this, it will look here for the provider. It finds the control container. And now there's a possibility to have a look and go up, even though there is this view boundary, to have a look at the ng-form, at an existing ng-form instance. And goes up, goes up, goes up, and it finds the ng-form instance here. So let's go to the source code, sorry. And let's try if it works. So maybe let's go to the frame. And here we say in the providers, we have the providers array and we have a view providers array. And there's an important difference. For the view providers, you can provide the dependencies here in that logical view. Other than for the providers, you would provide it directly at the component level. So when we do that for our frame, come on, here we go. We say, okay, we want to provide a control container. And then we want to use the existing ng-form. Okay, so let's have a look at the app. We see that we have the frame here. We can still edit the color. And if we have a look at the details, we see that we have here the frame material, the frame color, and the frame thickness attached to our ng-form, to our parent ng-form. Okay, this should not work for the others yet, because we don't provide the control container with the existing ng-form. So it won't find the controls won't find their parent form. Okay, and as you have seen, when the control container is injected in the ng model, it won't fail because it has the optional decorator. So this works anyway, even though it does not have a parent form. This is the reason. Okay, so when we define that, and we go here to, we can just copy and paste it, I guess. Okay, we need to import that for everything. And this, it was not the last repetitive part, but I really hope that this is the last repetitive part. Okay, let's go to the engine and let's add it here. Let's add it here. Okay. We see for the wheels, we already have it. Okay. For the frame, we have it. Okay. For the equipment, just the equipment left. Okay. And now, since we have everything in place, it should add and remove the controls automatically to the form. Let's see. Okay. Variable color, variable size, front wheel color, front wheel size, and so on. And you will see it just works. So if you touch any of the elements, you will also trigger the form, or you will also trigger the form state, even though the elements will be removed afterwards. So we have here, we have touched the frame thickness, and the frame thickness is not available if you go to the wheels, but the form is still touched and true. And what's also, what you keep in mind is for the validators are part of the control. And for example, if we add for the equipment some lights, and we add a validator here so that the lights are required, because otherwise it would be really dangerous to go by bike without lights. And then we go to the app. We see that we have the lights here. And if we trigger the lights, we see that it invalidates or validates. But you need to keep in mind that when you leave, the form is valid. So we have the validator on the light. You can make that valid, but when you change the tab, it's still it goes valid again because it does not know about that specific control with the validator anymore. So yeah, this is something to keep in mind when you go with this approach. Okay, so then maybe let's create, or let's go back and create a new bike, and then we can buy it and say, okay, we see a summary, we have the bike component again, and here, congratulations. Oh, nice. I've picked the Angular icon color for my frame here, and I get a 100% discount. Oh, this is amazing. Yeah, and here you can see a copy of that view model, and this is yeah, everything that I would like to tell you about the form. And okay, here I have another slide which shows the important lines to make this happen. And here are my references and resources. So this app is available on this link. I can also post it in the chat. I've used yeah, the Angular source code for my research, and also the Angular documentation. And here, this ng-conf talk is very similar to what I've told you right now, but Jennifer Vadella covers the reactive forms instead. So if you work with reactive forms, you should definitely have a look at this talk. And yeah, I can highly recommend Ward Bell's talk, and this channel here is also very helpful to get in-depth knowledge, especially about dependency injection. Okay, thank you for listening to my talk, and I hope you enjoyed it and got some useful information out of it.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I think we have time for maybe one or two questions. Alex, if we have some.
Okay, yeah, it looks like we have two questions. So the first one says, how do you decide when to use template-driven versus reactive forms? For context, I'm familiar only with reactive forms.
Mm-hmm. So right now, personally, I would use just template-driven form. Just template-driven forms. I haven't seen any use case where I should use reactive forms. I think the largest benefit you get from template-driven forms is that you don't have to configure the controls yourself. Everything Angular will do that for you instead of you having to do that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then the second one says, will the view providers use existing property to help maintain the form data model across a view container ref 2?
I did not get that question.
So I'll read it one more time. It says, will the view providers use existing property to help maintain the form data model across view container ref 2?
Mm-hmm. You mean here and here? If we provide that for the logical view, I don't get the question, honestly. So the ng-form value is different from our view model. Maybe that's a question. The view model contains all of the properties here, and the ng-form changes its controls based on what it can see. So if you have controls attached which have the value front wheel size, for example, then the form knows about it. But in the view model, the value still exists. Maybe that's a question. I don't know.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Do we want to do one more question, or will that be it?
Yeah, let's go ahead and do one more question.
Okay, so the last one says, how do you recommend handling the equivalent of the form array in template-driven forms?
You can just loop over elements that you define in your view model. So let's say we have a pedals array here, and we have some values here. Pedal 1, pedal 2, and so on. Then it's not compatible with the bike yet, but you can just loop over this array. So let's go here, for example, and we say, okay, we have input fields, and I hope this is valid. So live coding, I'm a bit nervous and all this stuff, and yeah, I hope this goes well. But yeah, you can loop over the pedals. Let pedal of bike pedals, and it does not exist, of course, this pedals, because it's not known in the data type. But you should be able to set the name you can concat the name, for example, by using the index. So you can say, you can define the index property, and then you can say, okay, this is pedal. We need to do property binding here, and you can say, okay, this is pedal I. And what Angular does is it uses this name here to attach the input or the control to the control tree. But we don't care about the structure of the control tree in this case, because we only care about the structure in our view model. And now you can bind here the ng model and say, okay, this is the pedal. But this is hopefully this. I don't know why it's. You can also come back to me and we can figure that out afterwards. But I think this solution would work. You can also have a look in Ward Bell's talk, because he demonstrates it. Yeah.
Perfect, thank you.
Awesome, thank you so much, Felix.
Okay, yeah, you're welcome. Then I stop my screen sharing and.
Yes, yeah, thank you again. It was a great talk. We're going to move on here. Let's see here. Going on to, let's see here. Well, I'm calling Chef Younes. He's our software development cook. So he is a Google developer expert in Angular and web technologies. He's a trainer, extreme programming coach, and tech advisor. He loves the challenge of boosting teams' efficiency, helping everyone enjoy every part of their job. His experience convinced him that the key to making quality products is collective ownership, passion, and knowledge of sharing. In his spare time, he enjoys open source software, writing articles, speaking at meetups such as this or conferences, and he sometimes goes sailing. His favorite trick is adding features by removing code. That sounds pretty interesting on its own. So yeah, you said you're a software development cook because you help programmers cook better apps. But what is your favorite actual food to cook?
Well, funny question. I don't think I have like a special meal or anything, but the things I like to cook is like mixing a lot of things in like a big pot. It might sound disgusting, but it's like very Mediterranean way. Like I always start like it's very Moroccan. Like you start cooking, you put the first question is like you cut the onions, you put the oil, and then you start thinking about what you're going to do later. Like it's the starting point. And yeah, I always start like that because otherwise I can't focus. Like I'm always thinking about other stuff.
It's always fun just finding what you have in the pantry and just making something out of it.
Yeah.
So you're a Google developer expert in Angular and web technologies. What steps did you take to get that distinction, and how has it benefited your career?
Well, actually, just it's funny, but I think the best way like to become a GD is not to try to be GD. Like I don't know any GD who was like trying to be GD. It just like happens. And actually, for me is the first thing is like when you want to share stuff with the community, like all the speakers here that are already doing. Like when you take time, you take personal time to prepare, to do some research, to do some open source and give talks and share knowledge and participate with the community. And by doing this, you learn a lot from people asking questions and everything. And I think that's the natural path, is sharing. Like the more you share, the more you get there. And in terms of impact, I don't know, maybe meeting a lot of people. That's might be the first thing, like get in touch with new people. But in terms of like, it's not like something, I don't like titles in general, like and I don't like the GD title, like I don't like the expert word in it, like you know. And we're more like I like to see it like the glue between like the community and Angular team and stuff like that. And so, but it's not very sexy like Google developer glue. Yeah, no. So yeah, so GD might be better. And so not big on titles, but and it doesn't change much. Like you don't get like to talk at more conferences and get like and lots of clients and just so it's not like something. It's not a business thing. It's not like a goal to achieve like that.
Okay. And what is your favorite activity during the summertime?
It's very good question. All the funny things that I don't know why, like every summer my parents decide like they don't work anymore, like they're retired, but they come in summer and they come visit me. So my activity is actually hosting my family most of the time, but it's fun. And it's very Mediterranean. You know, we fight, we argue, and we have fun. And otherwise, like I like sailing, and summer is pretty nice for sailing, except like there might be lots of boats, but it's still cool. And I don't know if I'll have much time this summer for that, but anyway, it's just every summer is completely different.
Yeah. And what has been your greatest hurdle to overcome as a programmer?
Sorry, I didn't get your question because I was looking at the chat. I'm going to close the chat because it's diverting and like, you know, it's too much distraction for me.
Yeah, what was your greatest hurdle to overcome as a programmer?
As a programmer, I think the biggest challenge is like myself, you know, and I've been, I think it's something I've been like, I love extreme programming and I love the idea of collective ownership and the simple designs and like keeping code maintainable, testable and stuff like that. And one major thing I noticed, which is sometimes missing, and I've been fighting for it like against myself and also with other people, is not like the beginner's mind. And the beginner's mind is like, when you come and solve a problem, you don't come with all your background. It's like, oh, I'm going to do it the way I know, because that's the best way and that's the right way. And every time you get new things to do, you have with new people, you have to figure out some way, not the right way, some way, and start from scratch with the people you have. And the thing I noticed while like coaching teams is you don't choose like the solution based on what you like or what you want, what you know, or on the product or the project, but it's more about the people, and it's really related to the people you have. So you have it's a mix, it's very important. And I think it's one of the biggest challenges is this, like forgetting everything you know and starting all over again every time. And it's a good challenge, like to think about like all the time.
Awesome. And then the last one I have for you is I saw somebody in the chat mention that it doesn't look like you have a virtual background. Is that a real background? Real pots and tools and things?
It's a real one. It's a real background, or a lot of special effects.
All right. I think we're ready to watch you cook some code.
Cool. Okay, let's go. So I'm going to share my screen. Yep. Oops. I clicked the record button. Desktop 2. And cool. Can you see my screen?
Yep, looks good.
Okay, I'm going to just hide my camera for a sec and then I'll put it back on. Welcome to a new episode of the Chunkies. Here comes Miss Braces as herself, and Test Officer Brackets as grumpy as he comes. And the only one that can make great apps, the developer or the creator. Today's episode is keeping tests healthy with DOM distancing. Hey, here comes Miss Braces. Oh, isn't that Test Officer Brackets? Hey, miss, why are you headed like that? I'm just delivering some minor changes to production. No problem. May I see your DOM, please? Yeah, sure. Okay. Thanks, miss. It's all fine. You can go ahead. Since the beginning, the app has been using 3 inputs for setting the date, day, month, year. One day, the developer discovers the type date input and also date pickers, but they were way too complex. What's that? The date input, sir. What? Well, never mind. I don't care anyway. I'll just have to run my checks. Where's the year input? I can't let you in if I can't check the year input. But sir, just an implementation detail change. The behavior is still the same. I can't make any difference. I'm just following orders and checking what I'm told to check. I will also ask you to step back, please. Okay. It's the developer who changed this. Are you questioning our creator? Yes, that's my job. He created me for that. What can I do? I really have to quickly deliver this to production. I'm sorry, miss. I have to report this to the developer. Really? Your Honor, we have a 1037 situation here. What should we do? Can't you see I'm busy? How many checks are wrong? 13, sir. Okay, display. Whoa, that's a bunch of complex tests. We have no time to fix this. Let's disable the whole 13 checks for now. Really? Those were our last test remaining. I understand. We'll fix this later. Thank you, Lord. Who's going to production? I'm going to production. And thank you. So this wasn't my talk, actually. It's starting. So my name is Younes. I'm from Lyon, France. My company is called Marmicode. Well, my company is called Marmicode. We help people cook better apps. So we do that through like coaching, where the idea of coaching is that we don't develop for people. We don't build apps for people. We don't implement features. We help them implement features and stuff like that, and organize the teams and learn and share knowledge and experiment things, and have a beginner's mind and stuff like that. I'm also a Google developer expert for Angular and web technologies, and well, we talked about that before. And I run open source organization with Edward Bozon, and we're probably gonna, or figuring out how to scale up this and add more libraries, because I have so many ideas but don't have enough time to implement them. So we might need some help. And Edward's doing a very great job maintaining a lot of the libraries there. We have like the Semver library, which helps you handle like semantic versioning with NX that Felix talked about, and automatically release your libraries and decide if it should be like a major version and stuff. And we also run a local meetup called Angular Lyon, and so it's called Angular Meetup. And today, our agenda, I'll try to be quick, but the idea is, first we got to grasp the moral of the little story that we started with, and we'll talk about page objects, which are like a bit known, and we'll also talk about like better alternatives, and I'll show you a little bonus and the key takeaways, of course, at the end, so you don't go empty-handed. So the problem with the story we've seen is that, and it's a really common problem, even not just in the web, but is the problem is when you have like your tests getting coupled to your implementation details. Well, the first problem is not having tests. The second problem is having tests that are coupled to the implementation details. And the DOM is an implementation detail. And the thing is, for instance, if I implement a test that goes and grabs like an input by ID, like in a form or whatever, what selector, the problem is that if I have only one test, it might be okay. But if I start implementing lots of tests, which is pretty cool, then I got lots of tests coupled to that implementation detail. So if I change this implementation detail, I'll have to go through all my tests and fix them. So what are the options? Well, first one is either you can throw the tests, which is not really a great option, because like if you refactor your code and you're like, oh man, the tests are broken, but the feature is still working. So that's tempting. The other approach is fix them, but it's time consuming because you have to go through all the tests and it's not very fun. And the third thing is just keep things as they are and don't refactor the code and don't touch the DOM structure or whatever. So how can we handle this, and how can we get like future proof so we can make changes without having to rewrite all our tests or fix our tests? So the general idea is to have an abstraction so that the tests don't get linked to the implementation detail. So you get like a layer there that in order to, so that when you change the implementation details, you just update your abstraction and you don't touch your tests. But which abstraction? What about like test attributes? That's like the first thing that comes in mind, that comes to our mind. But the problem with this approach is, so the idea is, instead of like using weird selectors like the idea, which is not a very good idea, or any other like some class selector or whatever, the idea is to have like a data test ID, which is quite common. You've probably seen it, you're probably using it. And so this way you can select the element, and you know that that selector is going to be stable, because we know that we don't want to break that selector, because we know that there are tests using it. I personally prefer calling it data role. If you have like better suggestions, just go ahead. I like a different name because I don't want to first have a script that has, or a bundle or a build plugin that cleans up all test IDs when I build my app. Plus, I might need the test IDs when the app is in production for my smoke tests. And also, I don't like to have like test IDs. It's not very cool, like in my DOM. But so I think data role tells you that it's not just for tests. You can use it for other use cases, like, like if you're scrapping your own website or whatever. And but anyway, this is just a detail. The problem is that's not an implementation. That's not sufficient abstraction, because that just tells you where the element is. But here, where in order to grab the value of the input, we're reading the value property, which currently only works if it's an input that has a value property. If tomorrow I have like another implementation where my form doesn't work exactly like this is going to break. So I will have to change my tests. So data, blah, 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 is just a good practice. It's not like an abstraction. So we need something better. So the first thing that comes to mind is page objects, which is quite common, like where, especially in wide tests where you test like your whole app and stuff like that, which is commonly called end-to-end. And so the problem is, so if I want to switch, if I want to grab like my 3 inputs, I might need like this page object as a toolkit to interact with the DOM. And we could implement just a class or just a function or whatever. We give it a date and it's gonna select the elements and put the values in them. This way, in my tests, I can simply instantiate the page and just set the filter date, for example. But our pages have things in common, okay? So because a page is a tree of completely reusable components, that's the whole point of like modern web applications. But so if a page is a tree of reusable components, then a page object should be a tree of something. And that something, you can call it however you want. I like to call them gloves, because it's what the gloves you put before getting your hands dirty in the tests and touching the implementation details of your components. So a glove is an abstraction that allows your tests to interact with components while keeping them clean of implementation details. So how does that work? We can implement this somehow like this. This is not like real code, but it's the initial idea. So I have like a page where I can search for recipes by creation dates or stuff like that. And so I have this glove that will interact with the filter. So instead of using the DOM directly, my search glove, which is like the page object for this page, is gonna instantiate or grab an instance of like a filter glove that allows me to interact with the filter there. And this filter glove might have like a static property or whatever that tells you what's the selector to grab that component, for example. And it can have methods like set dates. And when I pass the dates, I can control the filter. But I call the method here called this.get. But what is this.get? Especially that depending on the testing platform you're using, you might interact with the DOM differently. For example, if you're using Angular testbed in your jest test, for example, then or Karma, or vtest, you can. You have like a synchronous function that allows you to grab the item. But when you use Cyprus, it's completely different because there's the whole chaining and retriability logic behind it. So it's very different from one platform to the other. So in order to do that, what the Angular team figured out, it's actually to implement what they call the Angular CDK component harness. So this is an implementation of a glove. I prefer, we could call them harnesses, but in my opinion, harnesses mean lots of things in lots of different, depending on the technology, depending on the context. So I was trying to narrow the vocabulary here. But anyway, so Angular implements gloves using this idea of Angular CDK component harnesses. And the story behind this is that Angular material, so we probably use Angular material, you probably know about Angular material. So it's these material design components written in Angular. They are written in Angular, and they have lots of tests that are testing them. But the problem is that the implementation is going to change or started changing. I don't know, but I don't think it's there yet. And the idea is that instead of having like our own Angular material implementation, the idea is that we want Angular material to become a wrapper of the material design components library, which is in vanilla JavaScript. And the thing is, we want to make sure that we're not breaking anything. The Angular material team needed some way to keep the same tests for both, so we can make sure that even by changing the implementation detail, which is like actually the whole implementation, the tests are still the same and they're still passing. So no matter if they decide to use divs instead of spans, or I don't know, and or custom elements or not. And so the thing is, the idea of the harness is that it's not going to interact directly with the DOM and the implementation details. The harness is going to use a test element, which is using a test environment. But test elements and test environment are just like an abstract class or an interface. And there are different implementations, and you can provide your own implementation for your environment. An environment is like a testing environment, like Cyprus environment, Protractor environment, Playwright environment, etc. So here there is the testbed element which is using the testbed environment, and we have another implementation like a Protractor element, which is using the Protractor environment. And we JS Cutlery created the Cyprus harness, which is an abstraction for Cyprus with the chaining and retriability and everything. So we have a Cyprus element that interacts with the Cyprus environment. And the cool thing here is that you don't have to change, like the tests don't know anything about these details. They're just using the harness depending on how the framework works and the testing platform works. And the harness is using just calling this .get the element, but it doesn't know if underneath there is a Cypress element or a testbed element. It's just interaction with a test element. So how does that work? The idea is of the harnesses is that, well, instead of having like this glove idea, it's almost the same thing. It's just a bit more verbose. So we have a class which is like search harness that will extend the component harness, which is a class that comes from Angular CDK. And this class has a method called locator for, which is actually a factory that allows us to grab elements or harnesses in the page. And the locator for is going to grab, is going to create like this function called get filter that will allow me to later call it in my methods, in the harnesses methods. We don't want to call it too early because the elements are not there, and so we have to call it as late as possible. And it's using promises everywhere, so you have to use async awaits all over the place. So this is how you interact with it. So you can grab the filter, then you can interact with the set date method, and don't forget the awaits. There are linkers for that. And how do you use the harness? So if you're using the test bed with Jest or whatever other testing tools, you're going to use, it's a bit verbose, but you have to grab the fixture of the component, and then you can ask the loader that you create here to grab the harness. And once we get the harness, we can call methods on it. And very interesting. I think I forgot the await in my example. Just check that if you're following. And so in the assertion, I'm just grabbing the filter date and checking it's there. And if I want to use this with Cypress, you can use the JS Cutlery Cypress harness, and we can grab the harness, and I can set the value and then check using the assertion system of Cypress. In Cypress, it's based on the task chain, so you don't have to await to async await your actions like we did here. So we don't need the await. And now the last thing, so we're gonna dive into this with an example, but meanwhile, I just wanted to share a bonus before diving into code. The cool thing is that we have a problem, but we have a solution for it. The problem is when you're using Jest, or when you're using JestBed, or using Karma or whatever, when you're testing the components, we're a bit blind actually. So you quickly end up logging the inner HTML, or of course, if you're using the Angular testing library, you get like the DOM printed out a bit more in a prettier way, but it's still like when you're testing like complex components, doesn't help when you get like the HTML. I don't read HTML. I read pixels. I'm a human. Give me pixels, and so we don't see what's happening. So it's hard to debug. So you can spend hours there on your test and then realizing that there was just a typo on the selector or whatever. So it's just frustrating. On the other hand, if we are using Cypress, then we're implementing wide tests. So what I call wide tests is end-to-end tests, some integration tests, etc. So the problem with wide tests is that like you load too many things and you start loading the whole app and it's slow and there are side effects and you might need the APIs and an HTTP API somewhere and it's not there. So you have to mock the HTTP responses, but they change and the specification of the API change. You have to update your fake responses or your stubs or your mocks, whatever implementation you're using for your test doubles of the HTTP exchanges. So that's where Cypress component testing jumps in. So the idea of Cypress component testing is pretty cool because it's perfect, because it's really nice. It's really the missing bridge, like or not bridge, it's the missing kind of test between like really super narrow test and very wide test. So in Cypress we could have called that like UI testing. I can mount a component and interact with it, and I can even provide stub providers or fake providers or mock providers, even though the Cypress stub is actually a mock, whatever. So I can do a lot of stuff and control how my services, I can control the services and then test my components, because I'm testing the UI, I'm not testing the behavior behind it. So we implemented with Edward, we implemented Cyprus Angular, so we can mount Angular components in Cypress in an easy way. And pretty soon, as the Cypress 10 was released this month, there will be like a pretty cool, stable approach to mount Angular components in Cypress component testing natively, like without our library. And there shouldn't be that many API changes. So the cool thing is that if you're using Cypress Angular right now and you're ready to migrate to Cypress 10, when Cypress component testing for Angular will be there. And so this is kind of things. And recently Playwright released component testing for Vite based frameworks, and like so you can you can do component testing for React and Vue with Vite, but there is probably a way to do that for Angular 2, but it's not ready yet. There's nothing done yet, so it would be cool. It could be cool. So let's get back to our harnesses, and let's jump in a quick demonstration of that. So here I have just test here. I have my UI tests here, which is I've been running Yarn. I've been running Cyprus component. So this is running the Cyprus component testing here. So you can see I'm loading my component and testing it. And it's pretty small here because I have a small screen, but whatever. And we have our end-to-end tests, which are really loading the whole application. So what happens here is that I'm gonna check out my new implementation of the date picker. And how does this work? So what happens here is that we can see it here, it's too small, but what I've just changed is, we can run the test again and see, maybe they didn't see, because I didn't change through the IDE. Okay, we can see that all my tests are broken, which makes sense because I moved from 3 inputs to 1 date input, which makes more sense. And in order to fix this, I don't have to go through all the tests here, and all the just tests. I'm gonna just check out my date picker harness. So this is the date picker harness. I know it's a bit verbose, but there will be ways to simplify this later. So what happens here, so I have this static with method, which is special, like if you have multiple date pickers, so you can grab them with a selector, because I have a start date and end date. And here I have the set date method that takes the date. And now instead of all this, I just have to grab my date input, and I'm going to give it the date to ISO string. And it's too small. Okay, cool. Thanks, Copilot. And so I'm grabbing just the date part of it, not the time. And cool. Copilot can either save your demo or kill it. It's pretty slow. Sharing my screen, so it's slowing down even more. Okay, and so as you can see, I just changed my harness, and all the tests are having are fixed. I didn't touch the test. I don't even know what these tests are testing and how they work. If you want to dive into the test, you can check that out later. But if I check here, I have a Cyprus white test that grabs the whole that opens the page and interacts with the harness. As you can see, I'm setting the filter, I'm checking the meal counts, and that's it. I don't know exactly how it's implemented because that's the harness that takes care of it. Then I have another test for just the meal filter components where I'm using the harness too. So I'm setting the filter and I'm making sure that it's emitting an output which is called filter change. So I'm using it like in a really narrow test. And then I also using it in the Cyprus component testing. So it's exactly the same harness, using the get meal counts, checking how many meals there are there, and the date filter. And last approach is, okay, now I'm tired of handling inputs by myself. I want to use Angular material implementation. So here I'm switching to the Angular material date picker. So my date picker component works like this. So it's using the date picker, like the material date picker and everything. And the only thing again I'm gonna do is using the date picker, the material date picker harness instead of grabbing the input by myself. Of course, my tests are all broken, and when I check out the code, I don't know why they don't run again by themselves, but it's okay. They don't get the notification. And there you go. As you can see, like the tests are broken. And as you might probably know, interacting with a date picker or libraries that you didn't implement can be a mess. You know, like how do you select the element and interact with it? You know, so if someone provides like a UI library and you want tests, not like you want to make a white test where you're including their code. Ooh, how do you test that? Yeah, so how do you test a library that provides a grid or stuff like that? So, and if you start diving into implementation detail and grabbing their and reverse engineering their logic, it's going to be really expensive to maintain. But if the library is providing a harness, look at this. I can implement exactly what we've seen in the example, in the previous examples. I'm going to create like the getter, and it's this dot locator for, and I'm asking it to grab the mat date picker input. And my computer is lagging. Harness. Please, VS Code. Okay. I have my import ready, so I'm cheating a little bit. And here, what I'm going to do is, instead of putting the date here, I am just going to call this dot get mat input, and this is grabbing the harness of the mat input and set value. As you can see, there are a lot of methods which are pretty cool. Like you can focus and you can ask if the calendar is open, and you can navigate like next page, next month, and stuff like that, which is pretty amazing. And get set value. That's what I was trying to do. And I don't know if it's looking for an ISO string or what. Let's try this. Oh yeah, I don't know where my end-to-end test window went. I'm gonna get it back. Yeah. What did I do? Date is not used. Okay. Well, my computer is dying. Just starting everything all over again. Yeah. Sorry for that. Anyway, I swear it works. Okay. So what's happening here is that get mat input. So what's wrong with this? Oh, here's the window. You can grab it here. Oh, okay. So I wonder if someone noticed, I found it. If someone noticed what's wrong here, because I've talked about it before and I didn't put the linter. Yeah, it's the await, which is missing. So and yep. So here are my tests. This is the end-to-end tests. And where's the UI test? Oh. Well, anyway, I'm using like a really old version of Cyprus for this demonstration because I didn't update it, but it's a bit more stable now. Anyway, so my jest test is okay. My UI test doesn't wake up. My end-to-end test is lost somewhere, but it should work. So let's forget about it. Let's do something else. And what are the key takeaways here is that I'm not gonna, it's test harnesses and test gloves are just an example, but the whole idea here is what matters most is the costs of the test maintenance. And we tend to focus on test development. Oh, I wrote the test, it's simple, quick, bye, move into the next thing. But it's very important for the test to be readable. And as you can see, thanks to the abstraction, it can make the tests easier to read. Of course, the abstraction should be simple. It should have like a a really low cyclomatic complexity, so you don't have like ifs and loops and stuff like that. Well, oh, my computer is waking up. And the other idea is travel light. Like, don't put like hundreds of libraries for your tests, and you might not need all this. So you don't need harnesses for everything. You might need harnesses for like your shared components, like your design system, or if you're creating a library and you're sharing it. And if your components are used in multiple kinds of tests, like especially the parts that you interact with a lot, like the date filter is typically like all the filters and stuff like that you interact with in your app all over the place. And keep whatever you're using, harnesses or what, keep your gloves, keep the abstractions simple and stateless. You don't want to start debugging your harnesses and gloves. So harnesses are like the Angular CDK implementation. There are ways to simplify it. We can also, if you have any improvement ideas, you can go ahead, and we can also implement like probably a simpler and more framework agnostic approach, because the Angular CDK harness is quite coupled to Angular, not too much, but a bit, and it can slow down tests and stuff like that. So that's it for today. Just wanted to mention that I organize workshops, and if we need some coaching for, I don't know, for your Angular team or JavaScript team, and you need more tests, or you need more NX, or you need more architecture, just lost, or just curious about interacting with other people, let me know. I'd be happy to help. And I'm also making some video courses that I'm building, and it takes a bit of time. So it's on courses.marmicode.io. You can register right now. I might share some free stuff there later, and so I'll keep you posted through the platform. So join me on courses.marmicode.io. And if you want to reach for more, you can find me on Twitter. That's where I share all my fancy ideas and frustrations and curiosities. And you have my email if you want to get in touch directly. Marmicode.io, which is like my blog and everything, and the courses. And you can find the slides by following the link below. And let's see, our tests are passing. Yeah, the tests are passing. Everything's okay. Cool. Yeah, great. Just my computer is burning. Well, that's it. Thank you. I didn't see the time. I don't know how long this was. Sorry if I was too long, but thank you for listening. If you're still there. Is there someone, or?
Still plenty of people on. Yeah, thank you so much. Appreciate it. All right, let's just jump into a couple questions here.
Okay, so the first question says, let's say you have a library. How do you decide what methods you should add in your component harness?
This is a very good question. I think it's a pretty good question. I think it depends on what's on, it's when you design your library, you go top to bottom. Like you don't implement a library just, I'm going to implement a library and I don't know how people are going to use it, and just let's see. So you have use cases, like there is a story behind that component, so you know how people are going to interact with it. So you can provide like different layers of interaction. You can also provide, like, you can start something pretty simple and wide, like a single method that does that sets up the whole thing, and then maybe you can get more fine-grained once people start asking. So I like the iterative approach. So I'm not going to tell there's one approach. So the best thing is start small, because that way, like in open source, we like to reduce the surface first and then add things if they're really necessary, because once the functions are there, you cannot remove them easily. So just keep the interactions simple and as coarse-grained as possible, and that would make sense for on so as coarse-grained as you can to make it simple for your library users.
Thank you. So the next question says, how fast are Cypress component tests compared to component tests using Jest?
Oh, that's pretty interesting. I would say that I wouldn't compare right now, because everything is very, very experimental right now. So we don't have enough experience on that, and it's too early to judge. And there are a lot of optimizations to do on the Cypress side, but still, and also if we manage to use Vite instead of Webpack, for example, in Cypress, I don't know, it might also improve things. And one last thing is, of course, no matter what happens, a blind test like using like JS DOM and everything will probably be more performant, because there is no layouts and paints and everything. So, but I wouldn't focus on performance. You don't switch from one to another. You need both. You clearly need both. But when you're interacting with UI, it's pretty neat to load a component and see that the button is red or gray. And also, by the way, there's also another thing related to this. I don't know if the question appears later or not, but I've seen tweets about that. It's, but right now we're using Storybook. So how do I test that? And I'm using Cypress to go load the page on Storybook. But there are ways to load the Storybook metadata and load them in Cypress. Component testing interacts with them, but it's too early right now. It's not implemented. There's no stable implementation for that. But so it's not like more of a performance problem. It's more like what are you testing and what do you want to check? Because, for example, Cypress component testing would provide like visual screenshots and stuff like that, and you can compare them, check pixel perfect, add pixel perfect tests.
Okay, so the next question says, Jordan Powell from Cypress says that Cypress version 10, which has already been released, still doesn't come with Angular support and Cypress component tests. Do you know something that he doesn't?
No, we're actually he's working on the integration of Angular component testing for Cypress 10. So it's not ready yet. It's not ready yet, but it will be soon. So, and we had discussions about it, and we've been experimenting some stuff. So it's gonna be I won't speak for him, but I think it will be there soon. It will be there sooner than later. I mean, like, it's not like in 3 years. That's what I mean. So it's coming.
Okay, and so the next one, it says, no courses are listed when I visit courses.marmicode.io. Is this an error on my end?
Thanks, Lars. No, actually, it's just there's no course ready yet. So, and I'm planning to release them the day I have like a fixed deadline for the whole course, so like people get the whole thing. Plus, there were like my first course is about testing, and there have been so many changes about testing, so I've been waiting for all these. So it should land soon. Sorry for that, but you can register so you can get an email when it's there.
Perfect. And then the last one here says, how do Cyprus component tests compare to Storybook interaction tests?
I'd say that it's going to be a bit similar, but with Cypress you have like all the testing platform, which is Cypress for, I don't know, like imagine you want to test a component and that interacts with time, and you might want to fake the time and move forward and take a screenshot at that time, and then move forward again and take another screenshot and compare the screenshots or check if an element is there. And I think it's more advanced than Storybook for testing because it's a testing tool. And also a common issue with Storybook is that you end up polluting your Storybook with components that you don't want to put in the Storybook and everything. So that's how I compare them. And for me, like Storybook stays, I like to see it as like my design system catalog, or like my reusable components catalog, where people can try them out and everything. But if you want to really test your components, I'd say Cypress component testing is more appropriate for that. That's how I compare them, but things might change.
Perfect. Thank you. Looks like that's all the questions that we have.
Cool. Perfect. Thank
you all so much. Yeah, we've had some great talks today. Yeah, so I want to thank all three of you very much again for coming and taking your time to present for us. I forgot to announce this at the beginning, but we are having a lightning talk Lollapalooza next month, July 12th. So if anybody's interested in getting into speaking, I'm going to put the Google Forms out there. We're just looking for a 5 to 10 minute talk. So anybody, if you've never talked before, please come forward. It'd be a great experience to get out there and do your first talk. I think that's all we have for today. So just thank you again. We really appreciate it. And looking forward to seeing everybody in 2 weeks. We have another one in 2 weeks. And then on July 12th will be our lightning talks.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, guys. Have a good one.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.